Awesome. Okay, great. All right. I've got some slides to share with you. Just if we want to reference some of the technical language, but I hope to be quick with them and more conversational. And when it is time to field questions, the computer underneath the television monitor is where the microphone is, that where we can best hear you. So if you'll just give me a second, I'll fire up my screen sharing. And here we go. Um, so Californians for the Arts, we're actually two organizations. California Arts Advocates is your lobbying organization in Sacramento. California Arts Advocates sponsored the bill with with Assemblymember Berner and helped to develop and support and advocate for its passage. And Californians for the Arts is your statewide arts advocacy network. And we love working with San Diego Art Matters and all the people. You guys have incredible leadership. And thank you so much, Patricia, for being so flexible with all the vagaries of what's been going on for us and for me, and for making it possible for me to at least Zoom in, although I very much miss being there in person. Just to share the bill language, lots of words, but to kind of reiterate what Alex shared, this is the summary of the legislation, and you can Google AB812 artist housing and access the bill text yourself anytime. Because the interesting thing is that the text itself, if we really dial down into law and policy and some of the constructs of our democracy, it's the living, breathing interpretation where things get figured out. So the idea of the law is written in the text here, and then the implementation, how are cities and advocates going to actually interpret the meaning of this legislation and how it interacts with other forms, housing law and regulations and things like that. So we are in the implementation and interpretation phase, and we are learning from you. We're learning from the cities that are reaching out to us with questions, and taking the ball and running with it, so to speak, in terms of the legislation. But as Alex indicated, and if I'm speaking too fast or anything, somebody give me a little, I can see you a little bit, but just give me a little, I don't know, slow down gesture or anything. But I know I have a short amount of time. So the bill essentially gives cities the authority to set aside affordable units for artists within, as he said, either within a half-mile of a state designated cultural district or within a locally designated cultural district. And that's a really important, that authority is really important. It actually already exists for cities, but they don't know it. But this law makes it explicit. And that authority is important because the state can't really has to be very careful about dictating what local governments can do or can't do. And so this is just to say that, and I'll show you in the bill text, it's really interesting. This is a little bit more, breaks out some of the provisions. So one of the steps that a local government has to do is to pass an ordinance that that articulates that artists are a priority, have preference in terms of their overall affordable housing planning, how they distribute affordable housing units and all that kind of stuff. And we'll talk a little bit more about ordinances for fun, and the definitions. And you'll notice here the definitions that the provisions provide are about affordable housing, about artists, and about government. They're not about cultural districts. And local cultural district designations can happen in a number of ways, but it all really comes down to getting encoded in what are called land use plans, in community development plans that have a geographic and spatial regulate what happens in an area. There is also really interesting down below. The last thing is that the reason that the legislature, section 2 at the very bottom, is that stated that this matter was a statewide concern, and that's why the legislature felt like it had to make this bill happen, specify that artists could be authorized for affordable housing. And the reason it was determined to be a statewide affair is because Assemblymember Berner and other legislators traveled to the 14 state designated cultural districts. And oh, excuse me, here we go. I will not cough. Um, and heard that artists were being displaced, at risk of being displaced, and that this was I what I got to hear Assemblymember Berner express in one of the hearings that I got to hear, that this was a fairness issue, in that the folks that were responsible for making these cultural districts vibrant were at risk of leaving because of property increases in property value and housing costs and all that kind of stuff, and that it wasn't fair that they were being displaced from the communities they helped to build. And then, okay, so again, lots of words. I'm just going to talk a little bit about local ordinances and housing, but really, if you're working on AB 812 in your communities, the best thing you can do is make friends with your community development staff. Because they know the law, the housing or land use, the land use and planning law inside and out. So one of the key elements of getting a local ordinance passed is having a background report that talks about economic impact, the number of artists, if any displacement risk, any data you have. The AEP6 data is great, is fabulous economic impact data. And then when you develop that kind of advocacy and that case making tool, that can often be part of the background report that's used for city law change or ordinance development, just that lays out the conditions and why a particular change is being made. And then having some kind of coaching or understanding of your local housing policies. Every community has a general plan. It's essentially required by the state. It's your local constitution about how land and buildings and public transportation and utilities and all that kind of stuff, how that will be developed over a 25-year span. And those get updated. You probably had a recent update for your general plan. And within that, and they can always have amendments. It's a living, breathing document, but within a general plan is a housing element. And that talks about projected housing needs, where it's going to get, and dictates kind of zoning and all the kind of things, the decision making that has to happen around planning for housing. And then developers and home builders and folks who are going to be creating housing within zones, they have guidelines by which to efficiently produce a plan that fits within a development plan that fits within the guidelines that a city or a county has established to hopefully get housing produced or get your home upgraded, things like that. So the housing element is really important. Now, where if you're an advocate and you want to get an ordinance passed, you want to be familiar with, well, what is in the housing or element, and are artists or the arts or in the general plan, other spots too, where are we named or where are we inferred? So for example, the city of Berkeley is working right now to pass some ordinances to implement AB 812. And artists are in one of the policies, workforce housing, artists are specifically named. And this is why it's really important to get involved in these land use planning upgrades, is to make sure that arts and culture are named in the vision, in the goals, in the needed accommodations to keep, retain, and grow arts, culture, and creativity within your local communities. And another spot where they identified overlap is the goal around economic diversity, and that the community wants to support through housing and other regulations, the stimulation of all kinds of small businesses, of which the arts are often part of. So I'm sharing these two little policy pullouts from their housing element. That's what they're drawing from as a reference in building their new ordinance that they want to pass, to say, well, we're already in here, we're already listed as a priority. And then two other things to be aware of is if your community has an affordable housing preference policy. What I learned from the county of San Francisco County / city was they have there is a number of preferred categories of people that when you are there's a lottery for affordable units because there's never right now enough to meet the demand, right? So they have to have a system of prioritizing folks who are houseless, veterans, folks who've been displaced due to uh, um, what was characterized as racialized development that kicked folks out of certain neighborhoods and trying to get them back in those neighborhoods, et cetera. So you might have when an individual puts in an application and they qualify for low income housing, if they also qualify for some of these other vulnerable as these other vulnerable populations, they might get a different score in the lottery or something like that. So if your community is able to make the argument that artists that qualify for low income and middle income housing should also be preferred because we have a cultural district, that's something that you can work on with local government in articulating in any of those preference policies. And then also tenant preferences. A lot of communities, I would probably all communities have some kind of regulation to make sure that existing residents are not displaced. And it's a really interesting tension. We expect our cities or local governments to be able to go, yes, you live here, you should be able to stay here. But the thing is that we lived through decades of racialized zoning that kept people of color and folks of low economic means out of certain neighborhoods, to the point where there's federal law, fair housing law that is very, very explicit that local communities can't have total control over who lives there because that control was abused in the past. So we in some of these methods of trying to keep community members within our community members have to be in alignment with federal fair housing laws, which is a really interesting tension to live through now as we see in California, even my own experience, essential pillars of my community losing access to housing and things like that. So and then inclusionary housing policy. So last I heard from Edwin when we talked about this law was meant to govern what affordable units a city actually has or a county has control over, public affordable housing. But other cities are interpreting the law to say, no, we can also tell developers that they need to, if we can get these ordinances passed as a priority, we can tell developers that they need to prioritize artists or set aside for artists, set aside units for artists. And that's what inclusionary housing policy covers. It governs, it's when a local community tells, provides guidelines to developers in terms of how many affordable units they have to provide and all of that. So that's something to look at too. And then drawing also from other planning documents that have identified artists, arts and entertainment, or cultural infrastructure as priorities. If you've got a cultural plan, if you have a downtown area plan that points to arts, culture, and entertainment as an important economic development strategy, specific plans, that might be an overlay on an area where they allow certain types of activities and uses to stimulate the economy. And some of those might apply to arts, culture, and arts and culture activities. So that's why befriending your community development folks, and also having a local elected champion, at least one, if not more, that really gets us and is gonna drive city staff. City staff can't often advocate for for the things that they want to make happen. They can kind of develop plans, develop the recommendations and things like that. So just a little bit of insight on local ordinances. Edwin, I don't know if you want, oh shoot, I was hoping he would correct me on anything I said wrong. But we'll bring him back. I know we're running a little late. And then I know you all had a question about how are artists defined and qualified. So always for affordable housing, first and foremost is income level. But your community has calculations of what income levels are: very, very low income, very, there's all these striations in terms of income level and what that means in terms of cost of living that are based on your local community. But in terms of defining an artist, I'll draw from a model that the Hollywood Arts Collective used. That's an artist only living development apartment complex in Hollywood. And they, have a definition, a working definition of artist, which is also built in the AB812 bill. And that, but for someone to establish that they're an artist, a professional artist, they wanted to be very careful to delineate two criteria: that you either earn income from arts work or have are able to substantiate a deep engagement and commitment to your artistic practice, because we don't all earn our living from art making. And so they kind of unpack that. They have some language around income evaluation, and then also local communities will have a development, or a city will have a committee that will review applications and determine eligibility criteria based on what things that are outlined like this. Engagement in professional commitment to artistic practice, a portfolio. They wanted to make sure in their criteria that folks working in community-based arts, not just kind of professionalized arts practice, were also recognized and eligible for units. So that's kind of something to look for in developing your local eligibility criteria. And I think I've got one more thing about cultural districts. Again, I apologize with slides with lots of words. But cultural districts, there is the state program. In December, the California Arts Council voted to expand their state cultural districts to up to 10 new districts. Don't know when that's going to roll out. There won't be any funding for those districts, but just the designation. Excuse me. And then but then locally, cities and counties have different tools for designating a district. It can be, they might have a standardized process already in place. The city of San Francisco does, and I can make that ordinance language available to you. The city of Berkeley has 2 local cultural districts, one that was kind of laid out in what was called an area plan. There was a business corridor that the city wanted to make sure that arts and culture businesses were prioritized there. And then there was another type of planning tool used to establish a second cultural district. So really, some of the stuff boils down technically to municipal or county land use plans. And developing the language, drawing from other communities, what they've established and passed and have on the books. And if there's no standard process in your area, advocacy can be done to create the designation. Could be an overlay zone, which means they don't have to go in and change any zoning. They can just kind of do an overlay over an existing zoning within the boundaries. But it's usually area specific. It has a defined geographic area. Cultural districts do. And yeah, the city of Berkeley is currently working to standardize their local cultural district designation process and to activate the existing housing laws to implement AB812 to pass an ordinance that they're going to use the existing laws they have to prioritize setting aside affordable units for artists. And I think this is my last slide. I know Patricia was I'm going to get rid of this here, stop sharing. Patricia prepared me with some questions, which I hoped to already touch on. What entities can form a cultural district? Usually local stakeholders, and you're going to want to have city leadership, I'm sorry, city or county supervisor or electeds involved in that effort to really help make it happen. And talked a little bit about eligibility, artist eligibility. And there was a question about Oceanside expanding. I don't know The California Arts Council is the one that set up the designations, and I don't know if they've entertained, like, what does it mean to expand a district? Maybe that's something that that could probably just happen within local government. I don't think it's I don't think there would be any reason not to. Well, anyway, just to say, I don't know. I don't know that one. So sorry. Any questions? Yeah, hi. You might have to move closer to the computer under the TV so I can hear you. Nice to meet you. No.
You need to get.
Which, really? Not yet?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I'll be there. Oh, there you are. Hi. This is on.
I know.
I'm wondering. I know I'm not going to twerk here. I'm wondering if there is any thought on annexes rather than expanding the district, perhaps areas of concern or areas that might be neighborhood related, that we might look at an annex schema rather than just expanding. There's a hot artistic spot.
Yeah, that's interesting. To be honest, I am not an expert on local. There's the state designation, which is its own kind of celebrated, brings its own uh, uh, I guess cachet, helps cultural districts draw in other investors, and helps the state gather data on what those designations do and what the impact is. And that's kind of like I just don't know if the on the local level, how a locality determines a cultural districts, to me, I would imagine is a local decision. How it interacts with the state designation, I really don't know. I really don't know. That would be a great, this is the great thing, as Patricia acknowledged earlier, is your questions will help us inform our toolkit. So the ones I can't answer, I'm writing down. So thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. And pull it up.
Yep, I will. Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here today. Just a wealth of information. So I recently bought some property in Fallbrook, California, and I've been to two different meetings. One was with Jim Desmond. He was there giving, I think it was 10:30 in the morning, giving some sort of overall state of the whatever. Stood up and said, hey, I really want an AB812 committee here in Fallbrook, and was great idea. And that's all I've heard. And then at the end of the meeting, I went and I spoke with a couple of representatives I do know from Fallbrook, either design committee or whatever it is they're called. And she put me on a list and she'll get back to me. I still haven't heard anything. And then I went to another meeting, an actual Fallbrook, the planning commission people, the people who are on the board there, and stood up and talked a little bit about these. Anyway, my last statement was, can we please have an AB812 commission? And again, I just haven't heard anything. So I would like to know who's from Fallbrook here. Yay. Okay, good. So we definitely. Sorry. Yeah. So
it's an unincorporated district.
Yes.
And is not a city. Yes. Then what type of, do they go directly to some sort of county entity to be recognized?
Yeah.
I mean, I've asked 3 times already.
Three times.
Well,
they're unincorporated.
Yeah, if you were, two things. One is, you don't want a commission. A commission has to be appointed. What you really want is a task force, right? Folks who are going to kind of come together, study, put together a background report on the conditions and why the community should be eligible for this, why the community should have a locally designated, should initiate a designated cultural district, and should make itself eligible for AB812. So and I've been in your shoes where I've been the person showing up at all the meetings with the good ideas, wondering why nobody's picking up my good idea. And so often when it comes to a good idea like that, you have to find the folks, a couple of folks in the community to lead the charge, take some meetings with with the supervisor from that district and their staff, and see if you can't get a group of people doing it. Having, expecting, and you can also meet with staff, with county planning or community development staff, to see if there's any there in terms of their support. If you find somebody within staff or an elected who's like, yeah, I see this for our community, you'll have they can help provide some some wind in your sails. If you don't come up, I mean, and a lot of times I'll tell you, county governments don't often perceive themselves as dealing with arts and culture. They think of arts and culture as the buildings in cities where people go to watch things. And they don't think about arts and culture as like, people making things and networks within communities and, things like that. So when you have conversations like we might have a corridor, a little retail or commercial corridor that could use some stimulus, and extra attention with arts and culture businesses or activity. If you help them think strategically about the facets of their part of the county, and where arts and culture fit, that can help them. But a lot of time, not off the bat, counties don't perceive themselves as governing arts and culture. They think it's a city thing. So just some thoughts there in my own experience with advocating on the county level for things.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you need to see me?
Down.
Oh.
You can hear.
I can hear you.
so she
I
can-
think I can hear you standing up too.
Okay. I'm Dinah. I'm here in Oceanside. I run a community art space, and currently our board of supervisor is Desmond. He's on the conservative side, and it's a hot race. There's like 2 Republicans running for that seat, and one of them is John Franklin, who is in Vista. But Vista had affordable housing for artists through Community Housing Works. I sat on that committee, and what happened in that project, we had all these like criterias for artists, and some artists got in only because of who we knew, but most of them were like locals and friends of like council members. So it didn't really become a thriving art community housing. So, it's kind of like, it's not functioning. And so if John Franklin wins and this is happening, like, how are we holding elected officials accountable to the arts? Because right now in the city of Oceanside, we have a Measure X sales tax that brings in like $113 million, and it's for infrastructure, for housing, community engagement, and public safety. And if we're talking about housing, like this is another opportunity for our city to like collaborate, but also be held accountable as a designated art district. So I'm wondering what policies or initiatives that are holding the cultural districts accountable to like funding the arts. Because right now we got them to increase the art funding by like what, 25,000, but that's a drop in the bucket, for our art district that brings in $57 million into the local economy. So like, how are we holding cultural districts accountable that are designated by the state for funding?
Boy, that question's really layered with a lot of different pieces. But the one cool thing you've got going on that might help articulate that strategically is the election. And is there enough, would an arts-based candidates forum, bringing the folks who are running together and asking them these kinds of questions, like, and your question's really layered because there's the, how are things implemented fairly? Some of the issues with affordable housing for artists is they can be managed by an affordable housing management company that won't let them do anything cool. There's issues technically for each of those developments, but you can articulate a number of questions that let the elected officials know, one, you're on watch and two, you want to know their responses to them. That might be a strategy in this interesting election window to think about.
And then you, Bridget.
Good morning. Thank you for your wonderful report. I have
Thank
a
you.
question. I live in East County, a supervisor's district. If someone said to me, in Hamul and the surrounding areas, how many artists are there? How many dancers are there? We don't have a clue. There's no data you can just go in and pull out. So we've been talking to neighbors and so forth, but we don't have a place to go to try to get that data, because I found there's an artist that lives across the street from me by accident.
Yeah.
So there's no there.
Yeah, you're right. There's one way that they do it technically, like when you do economic impact reports, and it's how they do these economic impact reports is when each of us fills out our tax returns, if we have our own business or we're a business or an organization, we have a type of code. And then they look at those codes and say, oh, these are creative economy related codes. These are this. So there's an artist, musician, there is a fine and performing artist code that folks who are self-employed and are reporting income, so you can pull that data through tax records. And that's how they do those reports, like your AEP6 and the Otis report, things like that. So you might look at some of those. But the problem with that is that a lot of us function in gray area. Maybe we're in the arts and we're not making our living from that, or we are have a job, and that's all that kind of stuff. So the best way is to get a survey. And there's no workaround to that. And we're, as artists, we're often not as networked as organizations and businesses are. We tend to work independently. So but I what the best way to get a survey is if there's funding. Like we're trying to, what's great about a survey is if, like, say we want to build a network of artists, let us know you're here, kind of what are you up to? Are you at risk of displacement? What are your stories? It's a lot of work, but you can get really good, if you can activate networks of people and not just have it be one person or one organization that's like, I'm putting it out there and I hope people see this on social media. But if you really build a network of ambassadors for the survey, you can get really good results. So yes, I would scan some of the data that does exist. The Otis report does have regional snapshots. But a survey can be a really great a grassroots, way to get it done.
Thank you.
Thank you for thinking of that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Can you see me? Hear me? No.
Yeah, hi,
Okay.
nice to
Okay,
see you.
so everybody, this whole notion of me to do a project called Standing of Artists. It's like a census, and it'll be regional, and it's gonna try to capture a lot of data on our artist community, which we do not have. So as we're talking about change, always need to know change for what? You have to have a baseline, right? And for one section of it will focus on housing needs amongst the, arts and disabilities, arts and all this, and how are artists faring? So that as we develop our policy strategies, you're not just developing them and avoid. It's based on trying to move policy along, and data moves policy. So there's your answer. We're going to collect the data, and we are for it.
Yeah. Oh, you guys are amazing, Felicia.
And then, of course, there is AEP7.
Yes, I've been 5 years. Before that.
Yeah. Introduce yourself.
Bridget Parsons. So I have a kind of a very specific question. We're in the Oceanside Cultural District and talking about changing the policies for housing such that we can take advantage of this. And the question I have, there's like a million huge development projects on the books already that are already in the city pipeline for hundreds and hundreds of units, and they all want to take advantage of the affordable housing bonus. So there is affordable housing, the 10% in a lot of these projects. The question is, if the policy is changed as to who is priority for those affordable units, would these projects be grandfathered into the previous policy, or no? Usually those affordable housing policies as to who's going to get it is as of the time that the affordable unit is available, which is what I'm hoping, as opposed to those big developments being able to do whatever they want.
That's such a great question. And this was actually kind of an email exchange I had with Edwin back last year, end of last year, because he was saying that the law was intended for existing units, but then the city of Berkeley folks are like, we don't see that in the law. We're just going to go for it. And it's that interpretation implementation thing. So the one thing, the one issue and that I don't know about, but the specific question to ask community development folks is if where each project is in their development phase. Like, for example, it is there's always a little back and forth with development. They have a plan, the city or county goes back and says, yeah, these many units have to be this, and it's going to cost you that, because, and then you have to do this for sewage, and oh, did you think about this? And then they have to go back and redo the plan, and then they might redo what's their pro forma in terms of their price per unit cost based on maybe a more expensive upgrades they have to do, all that kind of stuff. So a development plan can go back and forth for a while before, even as I think the ground is sometimes, I don't even know, with the ground, ground is broken. And I don't know at what point the developer must confirm the number of affordable units in the development process. And I don't know then at what point then those units that are set aside for affordable housing, at what point do they determine who's eligible for those units? So that's a question to ask, and it might be on a per development basis, but a good conversation to have with your community development people. But the most important thing to look at is the city's inclusionary housing policy, and advocating for an ordinance so that artists in the cultural district, that AB 812 can be enacted within the inclusionary housing policy. Inclusionary housing policy are the guidelines that a local government gives to a developer that says, this is how we want you to map out a percentage of, you either provide these affordable units or you give us money in lieu of those units so we can develop that affordable housing somewhere else. And if within that inclusionary housing policy, if artists can be articulated because of AB 812 and because you are a state cultural district.
It's crazy. I'm just interrupt. Right now, the county, there's a county inclusionary housing meeting on the 12th of June, and they're actually doing this right now. They're asking for input from North County, well, in the county. So please, yes, please, and I think that's so important because we do need to have artists included in that verbiage, or however you want to say it, right? So again, guys, that's the 12th of June. If you'd like the link, I have it. Okay. I'm really excited about this. I property in Fallbrook that's on the RHNA list, which is Regional Housing National Assessment. Yep. I think it's going to be within 0.5 of the freaking art cultural center, and I just feel like we're going to be able to, not 10%, it's going to be 100% affordable housing for artists. I'm just so excited to be here today, and I just really appreciate all of it, especially. And please go to that, because I think it's really important. Yeah, June 12th, County Inclusionary Health.
That's
Sorry
great.
to interrupt.
We have no question?
And there is
Hi,
federal, I want to just note, there is a federal a federal designation that that 100 that developments that are 100% for artists, literary, and there's a third category, maybe veterans or something, can be eligible for low income housing tax credits, federal tax credits.
Okay, my question has to do with city versus rural. And we're rural, I'm in Fallbrook also, so there's no reason that this area in particular, right on the edge of the arts district, isn't jumping with this purpose in mind. But the problem is moving the people and the powers that be in an unincorporated community to go in your direction without a government. And I know transport's a piece, they're working on that because that seems to be a matter. But my question is there any other place in the country where we can select a model that's similar based on rural arts? We've already established ourselves as a rural arts community in Fallbrook. There's no question about it. We have 3 different, long term. Is there another city in the country or another rural area in the country you can connect me to for information? I'll be with Lisa jumping on her bandwagon, but is there a place, another city? Berkeley I can't relate to Berkeley.
Right.
Rural Fallbrook. So is there another rural community? I don't know, St. Paul or Minneapolis or something in another part of the country. It has,
Yeah.
I know California, I know is what we're at, but I thought maybe there'd be a leap to somewhere else.
Yeah, there is one in I don't know if it's considered Santa Barbara or San Luis Obispo County. I think it's called Blue Line Arts. It's an artist kind of little colony. And there's Paducah, Kentucky. And you look at Paducah, Kentucky. But knowing the difference between California rural, and I'm in Santa Paula. I'm in a community with 30,000 people in Ventura County. Let me think about that and get some other resources, because that is something that we need to drum up. The Grass Valley has a cultural district. It's an old mining. There's some density there, and it's an old mining community, so it's not necessarily as spread out as some of our rural agricultural lands, like where I am. But let me think about that, because I think that's a really good question. And the other thing is that I know that San Diego Arts Matters, we were working with some emerging advocacy leaders, and they've been thinking a lot about relationships with specific supervisors. So if you're on unincorporated land, you do have a government. It's just your county government. And so really building those relationships, like just as simple as, hey, this is happening in your district. Please come meet us. Please come speak. We're having an opening. We're having some kind of really special class, or can you come and meet the people who are making things happen in your district, and we'd allow you to speak, invite you to speak or present or something. Just opening that communication and being visible to them, and letting them know what your interests are, what your concerns are, what the challenges. It really goes a long way. And even if you just meet with staff, because staff often moves around, just start building those relationships and telling those stories. The biggest thing that we share with elected officials is especially those of us working in community, is that we're working in the medium of pride and love of place. And so often your stories light up and give them the goosebumps of like, oh yeah, people in my district are doing beautiful, amazing, human-centered things, and you ignite that pride in them, which is what they that's their currency. That's what they're working with. So I just really can't encourage that enough. And SD Arts Matters has done a lot of kind of thinking about these relationships and identifying these folks and stuff like that. So.
Do we have any other questions now? Because we've gone over for a half an hour, so we really do appreciate the time that you spent with us. Can we have a little round of applause? And And I'm hoping that when this toolkit gets designed and made and is ready to send out, I will be able to send links to everybody. I hope you found these questions useful, Tracy.
Yes. Yeah,
Good,
and I
good.
also wanted, yeah, I just wanted to invite everybody real quick. We have a series that's launching, I guess it's next week, Wonky Wednesdays, where you can drop in on Zoom for over your lunch period and talk about things going on. Well, our lobbyist will be talking kind of strategy and background, and every week we'll have a different topic. And would really encourage you all to come. Would love to have you there. Wonky Wednesdays, and our website is caforthearts.org. I know it's hard via virtual to give you the things you need to get right to the website and everything, but and we're also in our spring member drive. So if you got some extra pennies rattling around in your pocket, we would love your support to help keep this movement building and going.
We all join together to wish you a speedy recovery. Time for you. Maybe stop now, go to bed, have a nap, whatever. Get over COVID, and thank you so much. I don't know, are you planning to show up to Zoom tonight at the Space for Art panel or not?
I'm
Yes,
zooming
okay,
in.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there again tonight. The panel details are actually on the homepage of San Diego. If anybody needs to find those details. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, everybody. Nice
Bye-bye.
to be with you. Thanks.
Make sure and send me a link to the video when you stop recording. Okay,
Will
great.
do. Thanks all.